Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome to another Eternal Contenders video series. There's quite a bunch of new decks to talk about. We tried a lot of cool stuff for the easy queue, and there were a lot of decks that were quite powerful and promising and did fairly well, but ended up being slightly flawed and could have been and were a bit worse than some other things, but still pretty strong and cool and fun decks that you can easily climb the ladder with. As you saw, I climbed to, at my peak, rank 6 with all the decks I tried, and since dropped to like 11 and then won and lost a couple games. So I'm somewhere in the top 20 right now, I think. I haven't actually checked. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I want to talk to you about one of these decks today, and there are a couple more coming probably in the coming days and weeks as soon as I can manage to record them. And today I want to talk about one of the dedicated pledge decks. We got a lot of pledge support, especially pledge payoff cards in the campaign, making a pledge focused deck a whole new viable strategy, and this requires some different approach and heuristics than normal decks, so to speak. And yeah, I think I have a pretty good grasp on that by now from the testing, and want to talk about my Jennv Pledge deck today, and might have one or two other pledge decks in the future. Alright, before we dive into the deck, as usual, hit the subscribe button if you're new to the channel and turn on notification icon to not miss out on future content. Regularly uploading Eternal and MTG Arena content, and possibly also other things like Artifact once there's something new to talk about, and so on and so forth. And also please consider whitelisting YouTube on your ad block or just turning it off while watching YouTube. It really helps us creators a lot keep making content for free. Alright, so on to the deck. This is my current Jennv Pledge deck. So the deck is basically a kind of aggressive mid-range deck that tries to leverage the pledge payoffs, which in Jennev basically are Glasshopper, Gunrunner, and Vanguard Bayonet. All three of those cards are very powerful and give you a huge bonus, a huge advantage if you dedicate yourself to pledge. A bit on the parameters basically. So a couple things I learned while trying to build these pledge decks. I think at the very least you want 16 pledge cards. That's like the bare minimum. Ideally you want more, but most of the time you can't really support more, so usually my pledge decks had 16. That gives you like an 82-ish%, 82 to 83% chance to have a pledge card in your first opening hand, and then you get the redraw that also has an 82% chance, and even if that fails you can just redraw to 6 to try and find a pledge card then, because you basically cannot keep opening hands that don't have a turn 1 pledge card, because your Bayonet and your Glasshopper and also your Gunrunner are so much worse without it that it's absolutely worth it to even redraw to 6 to find your pledge card and pledge turn 1. That's the #1 priority. The other thing I learned basically is that you cannot really run any crests if you play pledge, because like I said, you have to absolutely pledge turn 1, and if you pledge turn 1 you can't play crests turn 1, and crests are pretty bad on every other spot in the curve, especially in a deck like this. This is pretty curvy. So the only thing you could run is something like Seek or Cargo, but I found in a lot of pledge decks, especially in blue pledge decks where you have Bayonet and also in time Glasshopper and always pledge turn 1, you don't really want Seek or Cargo type effects, or if so, not a whole lot, because you basically already have kind of like the 25 plus your usual Seek, because instead of Seek you just always have one pledge turn 1. So basically you have a higher chance of having more power than you have a higher you usually have more power than a 25 power base with 4 Seek power or Cargos, because while with those hands you get the same sort of like 2 to 4 power distribution in your opening hand, and the chance to also have a Seek as one of the non-power cards, or even multiple Seeks. While in this case, you have sort of 16 Seek powers that only work on turn 1, so you basically always have a normal power opening hand, especially on redraws of 2 to 4 power, but then you most of the time have at least one pledge card to pledge, so you always have the normal amount of power plus 1. And especially since this deck is not even curving that high, it's curving to 5, and also has Glasshopper to help sort of reduce the cost of your 5-drops, because all your 5-drops and 4-drops are pledge cards, making them cheaper. And you also have Vanguard Bayonet, which effectively, if you pledge turn 1, also is a Seek power, making this deck already have like insane amounts of power. The only issue that sometimes arises a bit is that the color numbers are a bit iffy, because we basically have 15 influence of all 3 colors in the power base, thanks to Diplomatic Seal, but 12 out of the 16 pledge cards are time pledge, and you usually want to pledge time on turn 1 for Teacher, making Teacher quite supportable, because you basically almost always pledge time and then just need one of your 15 time sources out of 25 power, which is not that hard to happen, probability-wise. And in the situations where your only turn 1 pledge is Gunrunner, you still have 7 other turn 2 plays as an alternative. So either you might not have Teacher in hand, or you have an alternate 2-drop, so that's not that big of a deal. So yeah, deceptively, this deck actually has a lot of power, even though it has very little, which is one of the benefits of these pledge decks. You get to have your early power super stable, more stable even than a deck with like 25 power and more than 4 Seeks or Cargos, while at the same time, most of your Seek type effects that are power early on are really good threats later, and even Bayonet, which is effectively exactly like a Seek, except that it costs 0 power and ramps you, which is insane. It still also has benefits of providing overwhelm and stats, like for example turn 2 Teacher into turn 3 Bayonet on a Teacher is really, really good. The overwhelm makes it really hard to stop the infiltrate this early, and also the fact that it's a 4/4 makes it really hard to trade with it in combat for most units. So Bayonet on Teacher is really, really powerful. And yeah, obviously also Bayonet allows you gives you an additional way to ramp into turn 4 Gunrunner or Moonstone Vanguard, just like Glasshopper does, giving you 8 ways to ramp from 3 into 5, and Glasshopper obviously also providing you a way from 2 to 4, and not just from 3 to 5. So yeah, that's a bit on the like heuristics and things here. So basically, the best power base for these decks usually is a Diplomatic Seal power base with mostly or exclusively seeds. Some variants you can and want to support some banners over some seeds. That depends. This one not so much, because we have a lot of 2-drops. We have a lot of we have 4 double influence 2-drops. So we really sort of need the seeds to make sure we can reliably play our 2-drops on turn 2. If we didn't have a non-time 2-drop, we could run Skycrack banners over Seed of Fury here, but since we have Dusk Raider and most of our all our pledge cards are non-primal, we need the Seeds of Fury to make sure we can play our Dusk Raider on turn 2 when we have it on turn 2. If it wasn't for Dusk Raider, Seed of Fury would probably be Skycrack banners. Okay, so let's talk about the cards. So this deck is fairly aggressive, fairly proactive. It has a higher curve than your usual aggressive deck, but it mostly plays like an aggressive deck. So that's why we have 11 2-drops. I most of the time had 12 2-drops, but I cut 1 2-drop for another mirror image, because mirror image is really good. I explain this later once we get to it. And also having 12 2-drops, especially Dusk Raider, which is worse the later it gets played, and having these other 2-drops, which you also really want to play early, make it so that I reconsidered the amount of Dusk Raiders. The right number is somewhere between 2 and 4, most likely 2 or 3. 3 is probably a bit better because Teacher can be a bit hard to cast, and also Dusk Raider on turn 2 into Glasshopper on turn 3 to draw the pledged unit with Berserk from Dusk Raider is really nice. And having more than 10 2-drops is probably also nice to reliably get on the board, because 2-drops are so important for Bayonet, because if you Bayonet on 4, you're not really ramping into anything anymore, so you really want to Bayonet on 3, and that requires a 2-drop. So yeah, Dusk Raider just gives the deck some more aggressive punch, is quite nice on most units, especially on Cykalis and Vanguard, and even Gunrunner with the quick draw. And then Glasshopper is like the single best pledge payoff in the game right now. First of all, the 1/3 is a pretty solid blocker early on, effectively ramping most of your units for free, since all our 4 and 5 drops are pledge units, is amazing. And then just basically being a free card because it replaces itself is amazing. The card is just so good, and that's why I try to keep my pledge decks time-based to be able to play Glasshopper, and also Glasshopper happens to be amazing with Mirror Image. You may or may not have seen that cool stream highlight that I posted recently, where I just mirror imaged a Glasshopper, played a third Glasshopper, a fourth Glasshopper, and then just dropped 2 0-cost Cykalises that I got from copying the Glasshoppers, and just killed my opponent on like turn 5 or 6. It was pretty hilarious. I'll link it up here. So yeah, Glasshopper and Mirror Image, good friends, part of why I want more Mirror Images, but Mirror Image is also good with like other cards here. Even with just a Teacher on 2, go in Mirror Image turn 3, or Mirror Imaging like a Cykalis is great in certain situations and so on. So Mirror Image has a lot of appeal. Not 100% sure if 2 or 3 is the right number. 4 is probably too much. So yeah, I can see just going back to like 4 Dusk Raiders and 2 images if they feel too situational and clunky to you or something, or if there's something better entirely that we'd want in the deck. And then we have for Teacher, just one of the best aggressive 2-drops in the game. Great stats, very strong infiltrate, just a powerful card overall. For Great Valley Smuggler, deck only really wants 1 merchant because it's too proactive. The 8 merchant setup is more something for like reactive grindy decks. And yeah, Great Valley Smuggler is decent, has great synergy with Teacher of Humility because the Disciplinary Weights is a relic and makes Great Valley Smuggler a 4/4, so that is nice. And we also have an Obelisk to gain to make it a 4/4, so it's like a kind of a 3.5 for 3 that also accesses our market, which is great. Then we have for Cykalis, for Darya, for Gunrunner, and for Moonstone, Vanguard, because those are the 16 best pledge units the deck could support. One other consideration is something like Chunk, but introducing double Primal is pretty tricky, and also Chunk is kind of high variance, and Darya I think is just a bit more consistent, and also we really want our pledge cards to provide time because of Teacher. And yeah, Darya is just like, is kind of the weakest of the cards, but it can give you a lot of like punch to push through in games where the opponent is about to stall you out, so that's really good, especially in Jennev, where your removal mostly deals with like small and medium-sized units, or is temporary like Equivocate, and then just providing deadly to your smaller units so they can just attack into whatever blocker is great. And in conjunction with the quick draw from Gunrunner, this can get nasty really quick. So just dropping a Gunrunner and then following up with a Darya with Amplifier for 1 or 2 creates a really nasty board, because you have these, like your 2 biggest units gonna have quick draw, Berserk, and Deadly, making them only jump blockable, and only jump blockable like, and you have to jump block them twice if you don't want to take damage from them, which is insane. The weapon from Gunrunner basically makes Gunrunner a cheaper, sort of more powerful Rizan if you're proactive, because you can use it multiple times and it's cheaper. It also happens to synergize really well with the damage from Display and Torch, allowing you to take down bigger things. And yeah, Moonstone, Vanguard, just good stats for its size, really good offense, defense, nice with Berserk, also because of the endurance, because it can still block even with the Reckless from Berserk, and also giving us additional resources. Bayonet, as I mentioned, one of the other good pledge payoffs. Given the aggressive nature of the deck, the +1/+1 overwhelm is nice, and yeah, ramping is just sweet, and also means that sometimes even if you're not ramping, you can just use it to preemptively do your power drop for the next turn, and then say market away your actual power, for example. And then we have our removal suit for Torch, for Equivocate, for Display, the 3 best interaction spells in these colors, and one of the payoffs for being in these colors, in addition to the good pledge rewards. And the mirror image, like I said, just lets you copy a lot of the good cards, gives you virtually more smugglers, or just some of the good threats you might have out. Cards that might come to mind that aren't in the deck is something like Initiative Descent, but I feel like there's just not that much payoff for it, because we have a lot of 2-drops and not a lot of 3-drops, and yeah, we would rather want to be a bit more aggressive. Also, Initiate suffers a bit from the amount of hurlers being run. Sure, it's still fine because it's a 1-cost unit and the opponent needs to have the hurler in their opening hand, and then it's tempo neutral and all, and they sometimes might not even be able to play it on turn 1 because they have a clunky power base with crests and other depleted power. But overall, it just didn't seem to add enough to the deck, even though pledge decks are really good at supporting Initiate, because most of your pledge turn 1 is time. But yeah, if we would have more 3-drops, like say an Amaranth Stinger and stuff like that, that would be a consideration. But then you basically would have to cut the Dusk Raiders and the mirror images, add 4 Initiates and maybe 2 Stingers, and is 6 3-drops even enough to make it worth it? And stuff like that. Although obviously Initiate is nice, because Initiate into Bayonet lets you drop a 5-drop on turn 3, which is really, really nice. So you can try that, but I don't think it's gonna be worth it. Initiate just doesn't do that much for the deck and introduces more power in a deck that already has a very smooth, very consistent power due to Bayonets and Pledge. And yeah, then the market, since we have this kind of low and pushed power situation, you probably need the banner. So far I kept it, but after what I talked through now, that we basically have 25 power plus 4 pseudo Seeks and still the pledges, making us better than the 25 plus 4. And a deck like this, if it wasn't a pledge deck, normally I would maybe run 30 or 31 power with 8 5-drops, and this deck almost certainly virtually has a higher power count than these 30 to 31 power decks. So, and I wouldn't run a power in a market in these decks, so maybe the banner is just not needed and could be cut here simply because of Bayonet. If this was a pledge deck that wasn't blue, that didn't have Bayonet, I'm fairly confident you want the market power just for compensation, but with Bayonet you might just end up not needing it. Then we have also its Praxis banner, obviously, because most of our double cost cards are all double time and double fire. Our 4-drop is double or single double, and then double fire and double time on 5. So we want to be fixing those. Then we have Purify, just a decent removal. It is cheap. It deals with annoying cards like Silverwing Courier that otherwise can be problematic, and it's also kind of the best removal option that we have in the market, other than Xenon Initiation, but Initiation doesn't kill something like Courier. If Courier turns out to not be particularly played, I could totally see playing Initiation, especially because Initiation is really nice with the Deadly from Darya and the Quick Draw from Gunrunner, and a combination of both means you can just kill anything with an Initiation. So that's something worth considering, or even if the banner gets removed, that could be an Initiation, so you have a cheap proactive removal that doesn't require you to tap a unit when you're under pressure, and then the Initiation to kill whatever big thing you need to kill. Then we have a Caleb's Choice, sort of some answer to some of the few annoying relics. There's not that much, but it can come up like a chain and stuff like that. and just a counter for something like Harsh Rule and so on. It's just like kind of a nice flexible catch-all market slot that I quite like. Then we have an Obelisk. The deck is sort of like medium-sized, so Obelisk making your units bigger and also sometimes getting to 8 easy and quickly, ramping with Bayonet and having peaks and stuff means you can even sometimes activate it, and also obviously it's a good relic for Great Valley Smuggler, turning it immediately into a 5/5 the next turn, which is really nice. So overall I think it's probably worth the slot, but it's also one of the slots that I'm not super insistent on. And the last slot is Howling Peak. I considered versions with like Howling Peak main, and eventually cut it for like lowering the curve and stuff. But to be honest, it might be still wrong, and maybe you want just like either 4 peaks in the main and not in the market, or you want to give up on Great Valley Smuggler for, say, Ixtun Merchant and run 3 Howling Peaks main and 1 in the market, and then just have like a fire market, which still works with this. You just have to cut Obelisk for something else, like, for example, Casualties of the Chorus or something. And then you just, I don't know, cut the mirror images for the said peaks, which might very well be fine. Sure, even peak even gives you image. The main reason for having image is that you can play it early, like turn 2 Glasshopper, turn 3 image means you have a very explosive turn 4, because, for example, if you pledge Cykalis turn 1, that means on turn 4 you get to play double Cykalis for 2 power each and hit your opponent for 10, which is really, really powerful. I'm not 100% sure which I like better. Those are like the few things that I'm not 100% sure on. And peak is still very powerful, and if the deck might need some additional payoff for having a lot of power and ramp payoff, since Bayonet ramping you into peak is also really nice, I might like that approach a bit more. Actually, the more I talk about this here, the more I am inclined to actually just do this right now. It's a bit unusual because I usually don't do this in deck techs, but I think it's actually worth it, because just from talking through it, I realized like how much power the deck actually has, and that we have kind of the room for this. So yeah, we basically just wanna just a couple of things here. I think now with the double peak and the deck not having as many sources here, we want this. And then, so you see a bit how I brew here now. And then we just Merchant. We could also go for like a Primal market, but I don't think Jennv Merchant adds as much here, because it just kind of attacks poorly and doesn't give us as good of a removal option because of Purify. So I think what we want is this. Oops. What we want is this. And no Jennv Merchant. And then basically we just need a fire card for the market. Could add a big burn spell. That's probably not that great. Like burn them all, but I'm not too high on that. I'm heavily leaning towards Casualties of the Chorus. We could also just put a display in the market. I like that, or just a Salchi. Although the thing is, like 7 is a lot and it doesn't get reduced by Glasshopper. I'm not that big of a fan. But having a threat is kind of nice. So Casualties of the Cause is nice, but doesn't quite work as well. Because then we have Casualties and Purify, and they kind of do the same thing a lot, but Purify deals with some things that Casualties doesn't. Mainly Courier. I mean, I guess that we are at a point where Courier isn't enough of a concern anymore, that the 4 Equivocate main aren't good enough. So I guess that's a decent upgrade. So maybe we do that. Because I quite like it. It kills Vargo, it kills sites, including Palace. So that is pretty good. I don't think we need factory quota, but we might want a unit. There could be like a pledge payoff, but there's none worth putting in the market, I think. This is a decent option as like an alternative threat. That also actually happens to work nicely with Gunrunner, so that's quite appealing. Then there's technically like Siegebreaker as just like a 4-drop and also a relic removal. There's not a whole lot that punishes anymore since AV Graft is kind of gone. That is pretty strong. Berry is kind of like okay, but not that great because yeah, like it's just stat-wise not that great, and you have played your Glasshoppers already, even though obviously playing a Glasshopper the next turn is kind of neat. And also giving this Berserk from Dusk Raider is not that impressive. Check the Praxis cards again to make sure. It's like Monitor, which is kind of like whatever. Not too impressed by that. Leather Glass Mage. Yeah, they're just like limited unit options, really. This is not very well supportable. So I guess it's just gonna be like Greatsword or maybe Siegebreaker. I don't hate Siegebreaker. It's big, it's good with quick draw, it's good with a lot of options. I think I like Siegebreaker. That means though, do we really need Caleb's Choice? We might not. It lets us kill something like Permafrost, but that card's basically dead because of Palace. And the rest seems to be basically relics. Counter aspect is nice, but not very important in a deck with display. Actually gonna X the casualties and just put a display in the market. That's something that I like, because the card is so flexible. And then I think we just probably put the sword in the market. So I quite like the Drawbone Greatsword with the Siegebreaker quick draw. And just also giving the deck some staying power. Yeah, I think that's the market I like for now. And in the main we have one slot open now, which we can just add either another Dusk Raider or just play a mirror image regardless. Which isn't a bad thing. Or what we can also do is we cut another Dusk Raider and add a Stinger. But I'm not sure if I like Stinger that much. Probably just add a Dusk Raider. But yeah, maybe you could cut like 2 Dusk Raiders for 2 Armor and Stinger or something. But Stinger is a bit so-so. So yeah. This is the list I think that I like now that we talked through a bunch of things. Actually just realized that we probably might want the additional top-end power of Peak here, and that mirror image might be a bit too narrow here. We don't have a Hoyan and stuff, but I could be wrong. Like I said, you now know like the 2 directions and can sort of try them. I put this version in the description down below, and if you want to try like the bit lower to the ground version that I had before, you can just change it yourself from the video. But yeah, now you saw some on-the-fly tuning changing from me, since this deck is still fairly new, and I just realized that we might have more power than we have payoff for, and also Howling Peak is just really, really powerful and might make the deck overall just stronger. Alright, so that's it for the deck tech. This turned out fairly long. Hope you guys enjoyed it. It was pretty in-depth and gave you a good base heuristic understanding of how pledge decks work, and we might see one or the other more pledge decks in future videos. But now it's time to hop into some high-ranked masters and show the deck in action. So stay tuned and see you in a moment with game number 1.